Solo Leveling by Gong. Bonus Stories 4. The first time I met him was inside the strange space my king had created. My mission was to test whoever entered the place. My king told me that he wanted to see if the human was good enough to be his vessel. Somehow, I knew that this would be the last order he would ever give me. After all, my king had lost interest in the war ever since he absolved the rulers, so there had to be a reason why he was showing such interest in this insignificant human. I surmised that my king was about to bid me farewell, but his order was absolute. I could neither question nor stop him. I had no choice but to follow his orders, for that was all I could do. After having most of my power sealed, I was made to stand alone in a strange space to put the human to the test. The inhabitants of this world call this space a dungeon, do they not? The dungeon simulated the look of a throne room of a castle, and deep inside this fake dungeon sat a tall throne. As I looked around, I tried to search my now hazy memories from when I was a human. Indeed, the architect has created such a sophisticated stage using my king's power. I ran my hands along the thick columns that lined both sides of an aisle leading from the entrance all the way to the platform where the throne was. I was amazed by the architect's craftsmanship. The attention to detail likely helped the human accept my king's power. Just then, I sensed a presence. Already, in a panic, I inadvertently sat on the throne as I felt something drawing near, much quicker than I had anticipated. After gathering myself, I wondered if I was being arrogant by sitting on the throne. My king's consciousness remained within the human I was about to test, so I was self-conscious about being disrespectful. In the end, I decided to refrain from displaying any rudeness and hurriedly hid behind the closest column. Creak. The door opened then as if on cue, and the human didn't see me panicking because of the surrounding darkness. Thankfully, my mistake hadn't spoiled my master's plans. I breathed a sigh of relief. Then, when the human was about 10 steps away from me, I slowly walked out from behind the pillar and blocked his way. It was a young man. His nervousness was palpable in the silent room. Of course, I did not look upon him favorably. So he is the one my lord has chosen. Even if this weren't my last mission, I would have had no intention of holding back. If the human wasn't up to snuff, he would die by my hands. But as my fighting spirit flared up, the man suddenly raised his tightly clenched fists at me. Does he intend to defeat me with his bare hands? For a moment, I considered him quite brave for a human. I took off my cape and dropped my weapons to the ground to level the playing field. Why did he seem surprised by every move I made? I admired the determination in his eyes, but did he have the skills to back it up? We'd see about that. The result was immediate. Arg! Thud. Though I hadn't used my full strength, I brought him to his knees. That was disappointing, though I had to admit, I was also relieved. This man's disqualification meant that my king would stick around a little longer. For the first time, I was relieved by my king's failure. I decided to give a fitting end to the human, matching the level of bravery he had displayed. I summoned the sword I had cast aside from the other side of the room, using the power my king had briefly bestowed upon me. I meant to cut off the human's head to kill him painlessly. I thought that would be the most merciful thing I could do for him. As if he'd read my mind, the man obediently put his head down. Excellent choice. He is as wise as he is brave. It's unfortunate that killing him is the only way to deter my lord. I moved to behead the man who had chosen an honorable death. However, at that very moment, his eyes shifted from their meek demeanor. Clang! He blocked my sword with his hand and thrust his dagger into my face. SHHK. AR. I was shocked. not because he had blocked my sword, but rather by the fact that he hadn't given up even in such a situation. And I had realized belatedly that his eyes had briefly resembled those of my master. I see. So this is why, my lord. I had let my guard down and was unable to deal with the man's continuous attacks. Eventually, I was thrown into the wall. Wham! He stabbed at me relentlessly. Clang, 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 clang. The armor protecting my neck was compromised by his attacks and broke. Crack. It was his strength versus mine. Since I was the one testing him, I was likely a few levels stronger than he was. However, it was my loss. Had I underestimated the human? Or had his determination pulled off some kind of miracle? Through my bleary eyes, I saw the man pump his hands in the air in celebration. Huh! Strangely, I let out a laugh when I saw him like that. Perhaps I had lost my mind. My gaze moved toward the ceiling as I began to black out. I couldn't see what these impossibly tall columns were holding up because it was too dark. It was like a physical representation of the distance between my king and me, which saddened me. I'm not sure whether I should be happy that my master was right or sad that I failed to change his mind. I passed out before I could reach a conclusion. That was, until he approached me and bade me to rise. He cared for me. It was probably because I was one of his first soldiers. I was grateful for his frequent acts of kindness. Of the ones that stood out to me. Oh yes, there was that one time he said to me, "You'll be able to talk to me once you level up, right?" How could I describe the overwhelming emotion I felt seeing his bright smile? I wasn't sure how he regarded me, but to me, he was my master, friend, and comrade. He and I were in numerous battles together. We went up against magic beasts, monsters, and even hunters. When he was happy, I was happy. When he was struggling, I struggled alongside him. When he was sad, so was I. I gradually accepted the new monarch even though I knew that I would grow less attached to my previous master as my loyalty to my new master deepened. Of course, it wasn't always easy. There were several challenging times. Use this. There was one instance where I had to fight a female hunter while I had many restrictions forced upon me, and the only weapon I could use was a sword that could shoot lightning. She overpowered me. Was that Black Knight really your strongest? I was humiliated. I also got a shadow soldier who was abnormally strong as an unexpected roommate. Scraw. This roommate was very true to his nature, but his nature happened to be extremely ferocious. It made me sorely miss my previous genteel comrades. That was why I honestly felt a bit better seeing Bellion taking Baru down. Just a little. But the joy of reuniting with an old friend didn't last long. Soon, Baru began to influence Bellion as well. Hey, this black flag. Do you think our king would appreciate it if we hoisted it to the top of the castle? Are you serious? I may not be as good at building like the ants, but I will do whatever it takes to make him happy. No, that's not what I meant. Oh, is that flag for our liege? Really? We do not need to get into my king's reaction. In any case, his combat power increased after absorbing the original Shadow army that had been awaiting his call in the gap between dimensions. And despite my concerns, he treated the previous Shadow Monarch soldiers the same as his own, and our united forces resolved to rush headlong into any battle for him. Training passed in the blink of an eye, and our determination was soon put to the test in a war against the monarchs. We fought with everything we had, and our king led us to victory. When he clashed with the Dragon King, we all watched the decisive battle from the shadows. The battle between the two of them was so moving, I was overcome with emotion. Scree! Whoa, are you crying, Igris? Be quiet." During one particularly dire moment, the entire shadow army went into a frenzy in our king's shadow. But at that moment, the rulers opened a door in the sky and their army came pouring through. "Rhea!" We cheered as we watched the reinforcements raining down from above. "You couldn't come any faster? I bet they arrived at the last minute just to make us anxious. If I was out there, I'd have tried to smack some sense into them." Regardless of our complaints about the ruler's army, we were exchanging hugs and happiness over our king's victory. However, our joy didn't last long. Our king spoke. "One more time. Could you use the cup of reincarnation one more time?" He told the rulers that he wanted to reverse time in order to delete every trace of them and the monarchs from the world he was living in. I had people I wanted to save when I was human, so I understood where he was coming from. I would probably make the same choice if I was in his shoes, so I respected his decision. My fellow soldiers and I were ready to collide with not only the monarchs, but any army for our king's sake. However, not everyone was invited to the battle. Some of us would vanish when the forbidden tool was used. Those soldiers dropped to their knees, wailing. I tried to console Iron, who had been with us for so long, Greed, who suffered at the receiving end of our king's ire since his rebirth, as well as the other soldiers who were grieving. Once we bade farewell, we went back to the past and were thrust into a new war. Our king's skills grew and grew, and we became more powerful in turn. We dealt with several predicaments big and small, but with each crisis he overcame, he grew stronger. That went on for almost 30 years. Having crushed all our other enemies, the army of destruction was the only one left standing in our way. As the fight commenced between our king and the Dragon King, we faced off against the ancient dragons. One of the ancient dragons, Granode, spoke to me as I tore through the draconic army. "Igris, you, who used to be one of two wings in the Shadow Army, now follow the new human monarch. Have you no shame?" Granode, who had already reverted to his human form because he didn't have enough energy to keep the shape of a dragon, panted as he gripped the sword plunged into his chest. I looked down at him in a daze. He was right. I had completely forgotten about the previous Shadow Monarch because the time I had spent with my new master had been so glorious. How long had it been since I completely stopped thinking about the previous monarch? Although Granode was dead and the battle raged on all around me, I was rooted to the spot for quite some time. My previous master had once been my entire world, but had my judgment become clouded somewhere along the way? My mind went blank as a wave of doubt washed over me. But at that moment, from elsewhere, I heard a call that brought me back to my senses. "Igris!" It was my king's voice. I hurriedly looked up to see a bright flash. The breath of destruction. Having used up much of his power battling the Shadow Monarch, the Dragon King had reverted to a human form. He blew fire my way. No, he was not likely aiming for me. I was simply standing in the crossfire. How unlucky of me. But many died from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was my turn. Krakum! I knew that by the time I saw the light, it was already too late. I froze in my tracks in surrender. As I was blinded by the light, I was struck with the possibility that this might perhaps be my punishment for forgetting about the previous Shadow Monarch to whom I had sworn my loyalty. If so, I gladly accepted this prize for my sin. But as I quietly awaited my last moment, someone stepped in front of me and blocked the breath of destruction with one hand. Kroom! The Dragon King's fiery attack was burning someone's left hand, but they made no move to take their hand away. I gasped at the one blocking flames that could incinerate everything for my sake. "My lord!" When the breath of destruction abated, He rebuked me with his eyes. I snapped back to my senses just as I had when he called out my name. My lord looked at me briefly before charging at the Dragon King once more. I raised my sword to fight the dragonfolk encroaching on me. Clang! Sparks flew as sword clashed with sword. The dragonfolk I had cut down cried out. That's right. I never forgot about the previous Shadow Monarch. It was simply that my feelings for him extended to my current master. I was completely loyal to the successor the previous Shadow Monarch had chosen. How could that be wrong? I was a knight, my king's sword. I was one of the two wings of the Shadow Army. If the time came to take my leave of the current monarch, I would tell him what I never had the chance to say to the previous monarch. It was an honor to fight under your command. Rewa! With a mighty shout, I charged at the dragons coming at me. With the war ended, we safely returned to my king's world. He was currently studying hard into the night. From the shadows, I could see what he saw. My lord, the answer for question 14 is B, not A. Oh, really? Thanks. The master had been expelled from his middle school because he had missed so many days. Now, he was engaged in a new battle called A qualification exam. Even though he got near perfect scores in mock tests, he would periodically lose focus and make a mistake. Who would assist him then? Grand Marshal Bellion, who was more muscle than brain, or Marshal Baru, who, despite his intelligence, was still a bug? When I was a human, I graduated night school with excellent grades, so if I didn't assist my master... You sure about that, Igris? It says the answer for question 14 is A. My king quipped as he consulted the answer sheet. As a knight, I accepted my error. It appears as though my training was lacking. I shall try even harder for you, my lord. I am my king's knight. I am my king's sword. My king's battlefield is also mine. Since my master has entered a new battlefield, my glory days go on.